My wife, who cheated on me, asked if she could dance with another man at a party. I replied coldly, dancing with him and staying single because I don't want you anymore. The words came out with a harshness I didn't know I had. In a room full of happy people and lively music, my words sliced through the air. There was a time when I trusted her completely and thought our marriage was strong. But that night the truth came out, showing a betrayal that started in the past, but still affected our present. She approached me with a smile, asking if she could dance with another man. My heart froze and a flood of memories came rushing back. It seemed like an innocent request, but I knew it had deeper meaning, linked to a past she never told me about. As I looked at her, I could see the tension and the truth she was hiding. A wave of emotions hit me: jealousy, anger, betrayal. I wasn't the calm, loving husband she used to know. The trust that once held our relationship together was shattered, and I knew there was no going back. I searched her eyes for the truth I didn't want to believe but already knew. She hesitated, but there was nothing more to say. The atmosphere around us grew tense, and for a moment it felt like everyone was watching us. I realized that the dance she wanted wasn't just a dance. It was the materialization of something she had been hiding. And then I uttered the sentence that sealed our fate: danced with him and stayed single, because I don't want you anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't need to hear anything else. I already knew enough, or maybe I knew a lot more than I should. The weight of those words was crushing, but there was still something I didn't know. Something that lay hidden beneath the surface of this betrayal, a secret that she kept so carefully, and that in some way connected that night to her distant past. What was she hiding, and what did that dance really mean? The details of that secret still escape me, but now all that remains is to discover how far this betrayal goes and what it hides behind a simple request to dance. She doesn't know yet, but I'm about to find out. The room was impeccably decorated, every detail thought to convey elegance and sophistication. The soft lights reflected off the crystals in the chandeliers, while the music in the background created an atmosphere of party and celebration. It was a night many had been looking forward to. An annual event where people in Denver's small, cozy neighborhood of Cherry Creek gathered to dance, laugh, and for a brief moment, forget their everyday worries. A man with a robust and confident appearance, whose blue eyes conveyed a confidence that many admired, and his wife, Jessica, a woman with delicate beauty and a charming smile. They seemed like the perfect couple, the type that everyone imagined would be together forever. Richard had built his life on hard work and perseverance. The owner of a small construction company, he had faced countless challenges over the years, but always found strength in Jessica. She, in turn, had the gift of lighting up any room she entered. Polite and charismatic, it was impossible not to notice her presence. Friends and neighbors saw them as the ideal couple, the embodiment of a solid and successful marriage. But like many things in life, appearances could be deceiving. Over the past few months, Richard has noticed a subtle change in Jessica. She was more distant, as if her mind was always somewhere else. Conversations that previously flowed naturally now seemed forced, and moments of intimacy became scarce. Richard tried not to think about it too much, convincing himself that it was just tiredness or the stress of everyday life. Yet there was something in the air, a growing tension that he couldn't ignore. The peaceful nights he once had were now filled with troubling thoughts that kept him awake, making him wonder if everything was really okay. She was caught in a storm of mixed feelings. She loved Richard, or at least she thought she did, but something inside her had changed. A part of her heart, which she thought she had left behind long ago, started to come alive again. In recent months, she began reconnecting with old friends, bringing back memories of simpler times before marriage and the responsibilities of adult life. One friend in particular stirred up feelings she thought were long gone: Michael, her first love. Michael was the opposite of Richard in almost every way. While Richard was stable and predictable, Michael was impulsive and adventurous. When they bumped into each other by chance at a local cafe after more than 10 years without contact, the spark Jessica once felt for him instantly reignited. He was no longer the carefree young man she remembered, but there was still a sparkle in his eyes that attracted her. They talked like old friends, laughing over shared memories, and that's how a seemingly innocent friendship began to form. Richard was completely unaware of Jessica's new connection. To him, Jessica was just busy with her own interests, perhaps bored with the routine. He never imagined that Jessica's past could be infiltrating her present, threatening everything they'd built together. He remained focused on his work, certain that any problem they faced would be overcome as they had always done. That night, as they prepared for the dance, Jessica was especially restless. She spent more time than usual in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress, touching up her lipstick, looking nervous. Richard in turn complimented her appearance, saying she looked beautiful as always, but the lack of enthusiasm in his voice didn't go unnoticed by Jessica. She knew there was something breaking between them, something that might be impossible to fix. They arrived at the party together, but it was as if they were separated by an invisible barrier. Richard greeted his friends and colleagues, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, while Jessica seemed lost in her own thoughts. She spotted Michael on the other side of the room, chatting animatedly with a group of people. He saw her too, and for a brief moment their eyes met. It was a silent exchange, but full of meaning. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine, a mixture of excitement and guilt that made her dizzy. The music started to play louder, and couples started to fill the dance floor. Richard noticed Jessica's discomfort, but decided to ignore it. He didn't want to cause a scene, especially on a night like this. All he wanted was a quiet night, maybe some fun, something that could ease the tension he felt. But Jessica had other thoughts. As he watched Michael move around the room, a dangerous idea began to take shape in his mind. She knew she shouldn't, that it would be a catastrophic mistake. But the desire and nostalgia were too powerful to resist. Finally, Jessica turned to Richard and in a soft voice asked, "Can I dance with him?" Richard, taken by surprise, looked at her without immediately understanding. "Who?" he asked almost automatically. She didn't need to answer. He followed his gaze to Michael, who was standing on the other side of the room, discreetly watching them. The penny dropped at once, and Richard felt a wave of anger and betrayal that almost suffocated him. That was the night he feared so much, the night when all his suspicions would be confirmed. He could have shouted, made a scene, but instead he responded with a cold calm that was even more cruel. Jessica was shocked by the answer. She didn't expect it and was frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. The lively hall suddenly felt like it had stopped around them. All the sounds faded, leaving only the echo of Richard's words. A simple request to dance led to something neither of them could have predicted. The night was just starting, but the events that followed would change their lives. After Richard's harsh response, Jessica felt like the ground was falling away beneath her. The coldness in his voice was something she had never heard before. He didn't shout or show anger with big gestures, but the icy final tone of his words cut her deeply. The elegant ballroom, with its twinkling lights and soft music, suddenly felt like a nightmare. She stood there, motionless, trying to process what had just happened, while Richard walked away toward the bar as if nothing significant had happened. Jessica didn't know what to do. The impulse that led her to ask if she could dance with Michael, fueled by senseless nostalgia and the adrenaline of revisiting the past, turned into almost instantaneous regret. She watched Richard from afar, his rigid silhouette at the bar, and felt the guilt gnawing at her insides. All she wanted was to feel something different, something new, but now everything seemed to have fallen apart. She knew she couldn't take back her words, and the weight of her decision was beginning to suffocate her. Michael, who was a few meters away, noticed the tension between them. He hesitated for a moment, but then walked towards Jessica, his face serious. "Are you okay?" he asked, genuinely concerned. He didn't know what had been said between her and Richard, but he could feel something was wrong. Jessica forced a smile, trying to hide the inner turmoil she felt. "Yes, I'm fine," he lied, looking away, but they both knew that was far from the truth. The music continued playing, and the couples continued dancing, oblivious to the unfolding drama. Jessica couldn't focus on anything around her. Every word, every decision I had made in the last few months seemed to converge on that moment. She wanted so badly to relive the past, but in doing so, she put what she had in the present at risk. Michael, noticing Jessica's discomfort, suggested they go outside to get some air. She agreed, desperately needing an escape from the suffocating situation. Outside the hall, the cold Colorado breeze brought some relief. They were silent for a few minutes, looking up at the starry sky. Michael finally broke the silence. You seem distraught there. What happened? He asked, his voice low and careful. Jessica sighed, knowing she couldn't hide anything from him anymore. Richard told me something that changed everything. She replied, still trying to process the impact of her husband's words. I don't know what to do. Michael, I'm trapped in something I created myself. Michael was no fool. He knew there was more to the story, but he respected Jessica's need for space. Still, something was stirring inside him too. Ever since they met again, he wondered if things could be different, if they might get a second chance. But seeing her so vulnerable, he realized how complicated and risky that could be. Even so, the idea of rekindling something with her was tempting. Jessica felt his eyes on her and wondered for the first time if she was really in control of her life or just being led by her emotions. Meanwhile, inside the lounge, Richard felt more clear-headed than ever, despite the whiskey he had drunk. His mind kept going over Jessica's words and the man he now saw as the start of the end of their marriage. He didn't know Michael, but that didn't matter. The simple fact that Jessica had asked to dance with another man, and on top of that, she had chosen that moment to reveal her desire, was enough to destroy any trace of trust he still had in her. Richard looked around at the people laughing and having fun, and felt oblivious to it all. He wanted to leave that party, run away from that place, but something kept him there. Maybe it was the desire to see what Jessica would do next, or maybe it was pride that kept him from leaving as a loser. Jessica was about to respond to Michael when she noticed movement in the room. Several guests began to leave, some with worried expressions. She and Michael exchanged glances, sensing something was about to happen. Suddenly the door to the hall opened forcefully, and Richard appeared, his face tense and his eyes fixed on Jessica. He stopped in front of the two, and for an instant time seemed to freeze, unsure of what would come next. Richard looked directly into Jessica's eyes, completely ignoring Michael's presence. I hope you're satisfied, he said, his voice full of irony and pain. Jessica couldn't find words. She knew nothing she said now would make a difference. The decision had been made, and the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. But what she didn't know, what no one there knew, was that night was far from over. Something deep and hidden was about to emerge, something that would change everyone's lives forever. With one last look, Richard turned and walked away, leaving Jessica and Michael alone in the darkness. Jessica felt a growing anguish, as if the air was being drained from her lungs. She wanted to run after Richard, wanted to scream, apologize, but her legs wouldn't move. Michael, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to comfort her, but knew things were out of his control. All that was left was to wait and see what would happen next, and it was in this tension-filled silence that Jessica noticed something that haunted her deeply. Michael's gaze, which had previously been full of affection and nostalgia, now carried a shadow of something darker, something she had never noticed before. It was the harbinger of a revelation she was not prepared to face. The night still held secrets, and none of them would be easy to digest. The silence of night fell over the Cherry Creek neighborhood as Jessica lay motionless in the darkness, the piercing cold of the Colorado air seeming to freeze not just her body, but her soul. Richard's words still echoed in his mind, resounding like a final and irrevocable verdict. He who had been his companion for years, with whom he had shared joys and sorrows, now seemed like a stranger, and Michael, standing next to her, seemed like a distorted reflection of the past, bringing back memories that should have stayed hidden. Jessica, we need to talk, Michael said, his voice urgent. He was closer now, his gaze intense, like he was about to share something he could no longer keep inside. Jessica hesitated, feeling the ground beneath her becoming more unstable. She knew this moment couldn't be delayed, but she was scared of what would come next. She followed him to a quiet corner where the lights barely reached them. Michael turned to her, looking serious, almost desperate. There's something you need to know, he began, and Jessica's heart started to race. I'm not the same as before. I'm not that young man you met years ago, that dreamy boy who believed in happy endings. Michael, what are you trying to tell me? Jessica asked, her voice shaking, forming a lump in his throat. I never stopped thinking about you, he admitted, and what should have sounded romantic sounded like a heavy confession. All these years I wondered what it would be like if our lives had taken a different path. When I met you again, I saw an opportunity to right a past mistake, to perhaps rescue what we left behind. But things have changed. I have changed. Jessica took a step back, the weight of his words falling over her like a blanket of anguish. Michael, we're different people now. That was a long time ago. We can't just go back. I know, he replied more somberly, but I'm not just talking about the two of us. There's more, there's something I need to tell you. Jessica felt her stomach turn. What do you mean? Richard isn't the only one with secrets. Jessica, Michael confessed, his voice low and thick with emotion. And the secret I've kept all these years involves you. The air seemed to escape Jessica's lungs, and for an instant the world spun around her. Michael, what did you do? Her voice was a whisper, barely audible, as she tried to process what was happening. Michael hesitated, his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet Jessica's eyes. I never told you what happened after you married Richard. I never told you how it destroyed me, how I felt betrayed not just by you but by fate. I wish it were different, but I was young, impulsive. I made mistakes, and one of those mistakes was keeping in touch with you, even when you were already with him. Jessica started to put the "but that was so long ago." Michael, why does it still matter now? Jessica asked. Because I never stopped wanting you, he admitted, finally looking up at her. I never stopped thinking about us, and it took over my thoughts. When we met again, I saw a chance to start over, but I knew I had to get Richard out of the way. Michael's words hit her hard. Jessica was stunned, her emotions swirling inside her. Get Richard out of the way? What did you do? Michael, she asked, her voice trembling. I knew that if I told him about our past, if I revealed what really happened between us, he would never forgive you. He would leave you, and then finally I would have a chance to be with you. Michael confessed, the guilt clear in your voice, but I realized too late that it wasn't the same. That time had changed everything, including us. Jessica felt tears run down her face. Did you do it out of revenge? Out of jealousy? Did you destroy my marriage for something that happened years ago? I just wanted what I thought was mine, Michael whispered, voice cracking. You destroyed everything, Michael, she replied, shock turning to anger. You manipulated our meetings, created situations to make Richard suspicious. All of this to try to recover something that could never be recovered again. Michael remained silent, shame visible in his expression, but that didn't lessen the pain of his revelations. She felt used, betrayed in a way she never imagined possible. What should have been a nostalgic reunion, a reconnection with an old friend, turned into an emotional trap, carefully planned by someone she thought she knew. The truth, now naked and raw, devastated her. Michael, whom she had idealized as a lost love, revealed himself as a man obsessed with an idea that no longer existed. Their reunion was not the result of chance, but part of a plan designed to destroy what she and Richard had built. Jessica felt anger bubbling inside her, growing uncontrollably. You played with our lives, Michael. You used our feelings as pieces in a sadistic game, just to satisfy your selfishness. His words cut through the air, filled with pain and disappointment. Michael had nothing more to say. The reality of his actions hit him hard, and he knew that whatever the outcome of tonight, he had already lost. Jessica, who he had loved and idealized for so long, now saw him for who he truly was, a broken man, driven by selfish and destructive desires. The mask had fallen, and all that was left was the bitter truth. I was wrong, he murmured, more to himself than to her. I thought I could change things, that we could start over. But I got everything wrong. Jessica didn't respond immediately. Disappointment was etched into every line of her face, and the pain of the revelations felt heavier than she could bear. But she couldn't just stand there, stuck in regret over the past. She needed to do something, make a decision that would shape the rest of her life. Suddenly the lounge door opened again, and Richard appeared at the entrance. His eyes locked on the two of them. He had come back. But not out of weakness or insecurity. He needed to face Jessica one last time. The scene he had feared seeing them together was now a reality. But to his surprise, it wasn't the image of a happy couple. There was pain, anger, and something darker on both their faces. Richard, Jessica began, but he silenced her with a gesture. He wasn't there to hear excuses. He wanted answers. I've heard enough, Richard said, his voice firm but filled with deep sadness. I should have realized this sooner, but I was blind. Blinded by believing you were still the same woman I fell in love with. Jessica swallowed hard, feeling like her words weighed more than anything Michael could have said. She wasn't the same anymore, and now she knew it. Richard, but she didn't know how to continue. Do you have anything to say, Jessica? Richard looked straight into her eyes and asked, Can you at least be honest now? Jessica felt the weight of the moment, but she knew she had to face the truth. I was foolish. Richard, I let myself get caught up in feelings that should have stayed in the past. Michael shouldn't even be here. He shouldn't be part of our life, but I let him in. I made a mistake, but I never wanted to hurt you. That doesn't change what happened, Richard replied, his voice steady. You made me question everything. Now, I don't know what's real anymore. Jessica realized that Richard was still deeply hurt, but there was a part of him that made her think that maybe, just maybe, things could be fixed. She stepped closer, tears welling up in her eyes. I know I hurt you, and it might be too late to ask for forgiveness, but I still love you, Richard. Richard looked at her for a long moment, and then his expression softened, though the tiredness and disappointment were still there. Love shouldn't be like this, Jessica. Love shouldn't destroy. Michael, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. I'm the one to blame for this, Richard, not her. I'm the one who brought chaos into your lives. I manipulated, I lied, and I'm paying the price for it. If anyone should be hated here, it's me. Richard looked at Michael, and for a moment it looked like he was about to explode, but then he let out a long, heavy sigh. What you did was unforgivable, but that doesn't take away from her betrayal. They both made mistakes, and I don't have the energy for that anymore. Jessica felt her heart sink. I knew Richard was right. Please, Richard, give me a chance to make things right. Richard was silent for a long time, staring into space, as if he was in a deep internal conflict. Finally he looked up at her, and Jessica saw that the man she loved was there, but deeply hurt. I don't know if I can trust you again, he said, his voice thick with bitterness. The silence that followed was heavy and oppressive. The decision was up in the air, and everyone knew that whatever path they chose from then on, it wouldn't be easy. But one thing was certain. The night that started with a simple request for a dance turned into a nightmare for everyone involved. Feeling the weight of her choices like an unbearable burden, all she could do now was wait for the verdict from the man she betrayed, but still loved. Meanwhile, a cold Colorado wind swept past them, bringing the promise of a morning that still seemed far away. The cold Colorado wind seemed to echo the silence that fell between them. Richard, Jessica, and Michael were locked in a painful impasse, each battling their own demons. The revelation of what was really behind that night still reverberated, leaving a void in the place where there had once been certainties. There was no going back, and what was left now was to deal with the consequences of his actions. Richard, still struggling with anger and pain, finally broke the silence. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice cracking with emotional exhaustion. For years I thought our marriage was solid, that we were different. But now I see that we were just another couple drifting apart. Jessica felt the weight of his words, guilt and despair overwhelming her. She had always known there would be consequences for her actions, but seeing the man she loved so hurt was more than she could handle. She knew she had made mistakes, letting the past affect their present in ways that couldn't be undone. But now, facing Richard's pain, she found herself in a moral dilemma she never thought she would encounter. Richard, I know I can't change what happened, Jessica began, her voice trembling but firm. But what matters now is deciding where we go from here. We can let tonight define everything, or we can try to rebuild something, even if it's different from before. Michael, watching them both, realized that his part in this story was over. He had been the spark that set everything in motion. But now he saw that the fire that spread was not something he could control. He took a step back, aware that his presence there only made things more difficult. I think I should go, he said, almost in a whisper, trying to leave the scene with what little dignity he had left. Richard looked at Michael, and for a moment it looked like he was going to explode with rage. But something inside him changed. He just nodded, without saying a word. Michael turned and began to walk away, his figure fading into the darkness like a ghost from the past. Jessica felt momentary relief, but knew the real challenge was just beginning. Now, without Michael's presence, she and Richard would have to confront what was left of their marriage. I don't know if I can forget it, Richard continued, now turning his attention completely to Jessica. Everything we built, everything we believed in, was destroyed in a single night. How can we just move on? Jessica knew there was no easy answer to that question. She could see the abyss that was forming between them, an abyss dug by years of omissions, unspoken resentments, and finally, by the revelation of a betrayal that brought to light what they both hid from themselves. "I don't know if we can do it," she admitted, the bitter words on the tip of her tongue. "But maybe that's what we need to decide. Whether it's worth trying, or whether we should accept that it's over." The moral dilemma they faced was cruel. Jessica knew there was a price to pay, but she didn't know if she was willing to pay it. And Richard, torn between the desire for revenge and the love he still felt for her, couldn't decide whether he wanted to save her or punish her. "Do you still love me?" Richard asked suddenly, the question sounding more like desperation than a request. Jessica looked deep into his eyes, searching for some spark from the man she knew, and responded with painful honesty. "Yes, I still love you, but I know that might not be enough." Richard looked away, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. "Love is not enough," he murmured almost to himself. "What we have now is a choice between trying again or giving up. But if I try, Jessica, if I really try, will you promise me you won't repeat that mistake?" Jessica felt the weight of the promise he asked for. She knew that promising was one thing, but fulfilling it with the weight of what had already happened between them would be quite another. But there was no other option. "I promise," she said, with more determination than she expected. "I know I failed you, and I know it won't be easy to fix, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to save what we still have." Richard stayed quiet, thinking about her words and the promise she made. Whatever they decided next would shape their future, whether for better or worse. They were standing on the edge of something unknown, and the choice they made would push them into a new reality, ready or not. So they stood there side by side, yet separated by a gap that might never fully close. The night was far from over, and what they chose to do next would determine not just their marriage, but also who they would become. The decision lingered in the air, like a tightrope stretched across the divide between Jessica and Richard. For days they avoided each other, as if even a glance could expose the truths they were both still afraid to face. Yet there was a growing weight in the silence, a tension that demanded resolution. They knew they couldn't go on like this forever. The morning after the confrontation, Richard took the initiative. He awoke before dawn. The house plunged into an uneasy silence. Sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hands, he pondered what was left of his life with Jessica. Memories of years of marriage mixed with recent pain, creating a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He needed clarity, something that could illuminate the path ahead, whether toward reconciliation or goodbye. When Jessica finally came down the stairs, her eyes met Richard's with a mixture of hope and fear. She didn't know what to expect, but she knew she couldn't keep running away from what needed to be resolved. "We need to talk," Richard said, his voice low but firm. Jessica nodded, and they sat across from each other, the tension almost palpable between them. "I've been thinking," Richard began, choosing his words carefully. "We can't erase what happened. We can't pretend nothing has changed, because everything has changed. But maybe, instead of trying to rebuild something that's broken, we should ask ourselves what we really want going forward." Jessica felt the weight of those words. "I knew that complete reconciliation was an illusion, but the idea of a definitive breakup was still terrifying. I still love you, Richard, but if that's not enough, then maybe it's best if we leave everything behind." Richard looked at her with a mix of sadness and understanding. "Love is not enough, Jessica, but what we can do is decide if we want to keep trying or if we need to break free from each other to find something we don't yet know we need." Those words, as painful as they were, brought unexpected clarity to both of them. The love they shared had been real, but the scars left by their choices left them unable to go back to the way they were before. They realized that sometimes the most difficult decision is also the most necessary. With a deep sigh, Jessica looked at Richard, tears in her eyes. "I think we already know the answer," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. "As much as I want to believe we can get through this, maybe it's best for both of us to go our separate ways." Richard nodded, sadness evident on his face. "I didn't want it to be like this," he murmured, "but maybe this is what we need to find peace." The silence that followed was profound, but at the same time liberating. They had reached the end of their journey together, and although the pain was intense, there was also a mutual acceptance that it was the right time to say goodbye. There would be no shouting, accusation, or blame, just the understanding that, despite everything, they both deserved a new chance to start over, even if it wasn't with each other. Over the next few weeks, the separation process was painful, but surprisingly peaceful. They sold the house, divided the assets, and moved on with their lives. Jessica returned to Denver, looking to start her life over without the weight of past choices. Richard, in turn, decided to move to a new city, looking for a place where he could find a new meaning in life. As for Michael, who had disrupted their lives, he disappeared from both of their overwhelmed by guilt and shame for what he had done. He left without a trace, carrying the weight of his mistakes. He knew he could never fix the harm he caused, but he hoped that, with time, he might find a way to make things right, away from everyone he hurt. Months later, on a sunny afternoon, Jessica received an envelope with no return address. Inside, she found a letter from Michael. He expressed his regret and admitted all his guilt, wishing that she and Richard would find happiness, even if they were apart. The letter didn't bring relief, but it did close a painful chapter. Jessica burned the letter, letting the ashes blow away in the wind. As the flames consumed Michael's words, she realized she was finally ready to leave the past behind. And so she and Richard moved on, holding on to the hope that, despite the dark past, the future still held something good. Sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Second story. I don't know what to expect from sharing this here, but I need some comfort after the painful news I got from my ex today. I'm a 29-year-old man.